Anand, welcome back to the show. It's been a while. I've seen you in the streets, but I haven't seen you, at least here on the Mea Culpa podcast, in a while. And to say that there's a lot going on, understatement of the year, so I'm going to just jump right into it.
Yes, I feel like every trend we talked about last time I was on has just metastasized and grown.
It's insane, right? Talk about being prescient. So given Elon Musk and Donald Trump's vocal condemnation of this bipartisan plan to prevent a government shutdown, what do you see as the larger implications for our democracy when two high-profile figures, I mean, you don't get two higher-profile figures than President-elect Donald Trump and Elon Musk, the richest guy in the world. When you have these two figures with their massive influence actively undermining bipartisan governance, what do you see as the implication?
You know, if you look historically at the rise of authoritarianism around the world in some of the worst cases, there's this word that we all know, that we all learned in school, paramilitary forces, right? That you had often a leader, there were certain things a leader might not be able to do themselves on the way to consolidating authoritarian power. So they'd have their hoodlums do it, or they'd have their brown shirts do it, or they'd have people who were technically private doing their bidding, maybe roughing some people up, maybe smashing some windows, maybe killing some people. But they could say, hey, that's not me. That's paramilitary. I think what we are witnessing in the Elon Musk Trump presidency, and I put it in that order for a reason, is the rise of paramonetary forces, not paramilitary forces, paramonetary forces, where there are certain things the leader, in spite of having that powerful position, cannot do for themselves, legally or otherwise. And Elon Musk is serving as this sort of outside private engine to do the stuff that maybe Donald Trump can't do for himself.
Or doesn't want to.
Or doesn't want to, or is legally restricted from doing, or would face blowback for doing. So we saw it in the campaign with, moving to Pennsylvania and writing big checks to people, which may or may not have been illegal, according to investigations that I think are still probably ongoing. But we've also seen it, in the notion of, can there be private actors who fund lawsuits that Donald Trump makes against, whether it's media entities or others? Elon Musk would obviously be a prime candidate for that. And we're now seeing it in the shutdown. He owns X, formerly known as Twitter, so he can kind of he has the technology to put anybody on blast. He's kind of regulating a section of the American discourse. He now basically is camping out at Mar-a-Lago. He is supposedly going to run a giant government ministry to cut government. I don't think, I am someone who's been warning about the role of billionaires and the kind of collusion of big money and big power in this country. Even I, in my wildest imagination, I think could not imagine this full frontal, a kind of merger and collusion of billionaires and power and political power. But I really think we have to grapple with this notion. We have a post up at the Ink about it a couple weeks ago, the rise of paramonetary forces. In this day and age, in this media ecosystem, to have not just, guys who might rough someone up on the street for you, like the Proud Boys, but guys who might fund a kind of private campaign for public conquest. That is I think a whole new phenomenon and a profoundly important one to understand.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because if the government does actually shut down due to this breakdown in this bipartisan plan, and I want to be clear for my listeners, this was a bipartisan plan that had already been discussed and negotiated again and again and again for well over a month. How do you think that it'll impact Speaker Mike Johnson's credibility, as well as him remaining as Speaker of the House?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure you've heard there were these murmurs of Republicans starting to talk about do they want a Speaker Elon Musk? Because as we all know, the Speaker of the House doesn't actually need to be in the
A
House,
member. Yep.
and perhaps doesn't even need a fully functioning sort of cognitive makeup. So, now people are suggesting that the architect of this kind of impasse and shutdown maybe should become the Speaker of the House. I think you have to step back and say, this Republican Party has given up on the idea of having actual solutions for people's lives. And so, you know, allowing a tech billionaire to essentially hijack the party after Donald Trump hijacked the party, right? This is just the plane. The GOP is the plane that just keeps getting hijacked, right? And now the Donald Trump hijacked Republican Party has been hijacked again by Elon Musk. And we're going to see, actually, as you know very well, better than anyone, certainly in this podcast, Donald Trump doesn't necessarily love being
Number
upstaged or
two.
even sharing the stage. So we're going to see. I mean, we're right now in the early honeymoon days of that relationship. But we're going to see how that relationship develops. I wonder if you have predictions of how long he will
Yeah.
tolerate a co-equal partner.
Yeah, he doesn't tolerate any partners. He doesn't have partners in business. In fact, with all due respect, he doesn't even really have partners in life, as you saw with both Ivana and then Marla, as well as the relationship that kind of exists but doesn't really exist with Melania. In fact, I'll tell you, I
Michael,
know.
what are you telling me? That I thought that was a real and beautiful, touching love story.
Sure. One of the things that I can tell you is he definitively does not like the fact that they keep calling Elon Musk Elania, as meaning the second gentleman, right? Because number one, it goes to his masculinity, and two, it undermines Melania, which is part of the picture that you get with Donald Trump, billionaire, married to the beautiful woman, the whole 9 yards with the marvelous children, right? That's the whole facade, right? That's the whole mirage that they're producing. I say under 4 months. So I'm talking about before May.
Well,
This
why
whole
do you
thing
think
goes, and I'm going to go one step. I don't even know whether it'll go that far into May, because once he's in power, I don't care if you're the richest man in the world. The one thing that you can never beat, no matter how much money you got, you can't beat government.
Yeah. Here's what I don't understand. Maybe you can help me understand it. This time around, Trump won an actual victory. Lots of voters moved, as we all know. Other voters were uninspired for the other side. You'd imagine there'd be at least a moment of having some sense of, like, I got this. And instead, he has turned immediately to needing almost a kind of boss. I mean, Donald Trump's boss right now is Elon Musk. Why would he decenter himself after a pretty convincing victory?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if he sees it that way. In his defense, what he's thinking, I'm the president of the United States, president elect of the United States. And if I can get people to do for me what needs to be done, I'm happy that somebody else is doing it and not me. It's no different than even at the Trump organization, where he would turn around and say, I'm interested in the acquisition of so and so. Go get me all the information. He's certainly not getting the information. Now go call and make the deal. Ultimately, who's the guy who's signing the papers? It's him, despite the fact he didn't do the work on it. He looked over a couple of documents here and there. You had to give him, the ups and the downs, the pros and the cons. But he's more than happy to let somebody do the work, but he's even more happy to take the credit when it goes favorable. when it doesn't go favorably, like for example in 2017 when they attempted to pass the Muslim ban, he blamed it on Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon. But if it had gone well, he would have taken the credit. So he insulates himself from error.
Yeah. Wow.
That's the answer. Now I want to ask you this as well. How much do you think of Mike Johnson's speakership do you believe is being controlled by the far right faction of the GOP, the MAGA maniacs? And does this mean that we're looking at a puppet speaker scenario akin to kind of like what we've seen in past Congresses?
Well, I mean, he was quite a ultra right fanatic himself. So, in no way is he a moderate. I think what happens is people like that are promoted into a role of actual responsibility instead of, the kind of congressional equivalent of just being like a tweeter. When you have an actual job, when you're the actual speaker, no matter what your ideology, most mature people come to some measure of like, okay, I got to sort of make this train run. And now he's getting it from all sides. And I think, again, if you are a party focused on what is good for lots of people, you don't need to do all of this stuff, right? They need to do pirouettes and somersaults and leaps off of buildings every day
Mm-hmm.
to distract people from the fact that they have no answers for anything in your life. Like, they're not even thinking about anything in your life, right? Prices are
Well,
high. Yes.
by the way, how could they? Why would they? If the government shuts down as a result of the interference by Musk and what Trump obviously wants, how is it going to affect their lives? How's it going to affect the lives of Linda McMahon or Lutnick or Phelan or Pete Hegseth? How's it going to affect any of their lives? And the
It
answer
won't.
is it doesn't. It
And here's
doesn't.
what's amazing, right? This modern Republican Party is so anti-immigrant. It has allowed two immigrants, Elon Musk and Rupert Murdoch,
Mm-hmm.
to essentially own the right, to essentially own the party, to essentially own the brains of millions and millions of people more and more. And I think you can see Musk superseding, Murdoch where he used to be, right? With newer media approaches. And it's just incredible that they malign immigrants, but they've sold out the country to immigrants who, I don't know, I come from an immigrant family. My family is so damn grateful. It would break my family's heart to leave this country worse off in any way. I think we are probably more grateful and more careful about not doing damage to this country than someone born here, because we're so grateful. And to have two of the most ungrateful immigrants in American history, Rupert Murdoch and Elon Musk, basically gut punch the country and suffocate opportunity for people, and basically leech the right and make it their kind of their kind of little bitch. It's just a very, very sad tale.
Yeah, I come from an immigrant family as well. My father was born in Poland. After the war, ended up in Canada and then to the United States in the mid '60s. And so my wife is born in the former Soviet Union in the area of the Ukraine. I mean, I get it, and I speak to my father about this on a daily basis when they call every day. To talk about this. They can't believe. My father can't believe, for example, like the rise in anti-Semitism. Never in his life did he think here in America would you see boats being paraded down in Palm Beach, because he's in the Palm Beach County area as well. With swastikas on it. Especially being a Holocaust survivor. Never did he think that he was going to see this the country has gotten out of control. So when you say that they are depressed and angered that they're not going to be leaving, as I don't believe our generation is going to be leaving to our children and future generations a world, a country better than what we inherited as. I'm with you on that all the way.
And it's sort of our one job, right? It's our one job.
Yeah. Whether it's
to
the
leave things a
climate,
little
whether
better.
it's gun control, whether it's going to be the disparity of income and wealth. At one point in time, I think the whole country is going to be owned by 4 or 5 different families. That's about it. But since we're talking about wealth, right? Staying on Elon for a second, his interference, as I see it, walking with his kid on his shoulders through the halls of Congress as if he is the shadow president, his interference in a government shutdown seems, at least to me, to not only be unprecedented for a private person, a private citizen. Never in my life have I seen this before. But the question I want to ask you, if you think that there's a legal line that's being crossed here in terms of interference in government function, or even going as far as seditious conspiracy. And don't you think that that needs to be examined more closely?
Look, you're the lawyer in this conversation, so I don't know what laws have been violated. It seems to me, if we have incarcerated as many people as we have for having a little marijuana on them, or selling a little bit,
or doing an NDA for another guy to get his pecker pulled by a porn star. Yeah, yeah.
Then surely tipping an election, attempting to use your money to tip an election result, and then immediately trying to parlay that into policy that you would like that would benefit you, and actually then trying to get a government job while still having all these other roles. And as you say, being both at Mar-a-Lago in the kind of, administration hatching business, and then prancing around Congress or whatever else, with one of the kids that he knows about. It's really one of the kids he's still in touch with, I should also say, right? It should be illegal if it isn't. I think one of the problems is our laws on this stuff have just been kind of like, we have a lot of little laws on a lot of little things. Like if you can't give this much and it's this much more than this much, you got to disclose this. But I guess we didn't contemplate the scale of just like, what if a multi-centi billionaire tries to buy the United States government? And it's Citizens United. It's the fact that we have, and it's look, it is Democrats as well as Republicans. I was at the DNC this summer. I don't blame Democrats for, as were you, I don't blame Democrats for not wanting to unilaterally disarm. But Democrats have also allowed themselves to be a party bought and paid for by billionaires. Democrats also roll out the red carpet for billionaires. Democrats also allow people like Reid Hoffman and others to determine the course of things. So there is a two-party consensus on billionaires being somewhere from great to at least tolerable and useful, right? I wrote my Winners Take All book is now 6 years old, and I don't know how many people I have succeeded in convincing that instead of a two-party consensus on billionaires being great or good or tolerable, we should actually not, have them. I'm sharing some exciting news that happened this week. This book came out, Bill Clinton's new book, Citizen. Mm-hmm. And even though Winners Take All is 6 years old, Bill Clinton, and I really admire this, he took on my arguments in Winners Take All in this book and said, basically, he responded over 4 pages. He said, I said billionaires are problematic in the way that they pretend to care while grabbing more wealth and power. And then he kind of defends them. And he says, we'd be worse off in a world without Bill Gates and Laurene Powell Jobs and Susie Buffett. He names the ones he likes. And look, I'm actually very grateful for the former president actually really engaged with the arguments of the book and was thoughtful about it. And, he and I maybe have a different view about it. So I thought that was good that he did that. But it's interesting to me that after all these years, there's just something in the American psyche on the left as well as the right that is frankly willing to be ruled by these kind of private oligarchs. Americans are so rightfully hypersensitive to government overreach, right? To the government restricting your freedom in any way. That's good. I like that about us. But we are completely blind to private overreach, right? To your employer restricting your freedom, to a company that sells you toxic food, restricting your freedom.
Well, look at, for example, the Roundup. Look at, for example, Roundup, right? That weed, that weed extractor, right? That's causing cancer. There's like a $50 billion settlement that was made that's sitting in some lawyer's legal fund for people who are afflicted with cancer. Meanwhile, it's still on the market. I just don't get it.
It's so
It makes
interesting.
no sense to me.
When I mean, I studied this a little bit when I was younger. I think because of the unique heritage of the United States, right? The Declaration of Independence is this manifesto against the king trying to grab too much power. Right? He's doing this to us. He's doing that to. It's just this like big list of complaints, right? He's doing this. He's taxing this. We started as a country with this heritage of kings are bad, right? Kings are bad, and centralized power is bad. And so we're very, very vigilant in general about, centralized government. You're a lawyer, like the whole Constitution, as you know, and particularly the Bill of Rights. But our whole legal structure is like being very, very careful about the overreach of government power, right? But the idea that you can be oppressed, that most people, in fact, who are oppressed in their daily lives, not by the government necessarily, but by a landlord, an employer, someone selling you a toxic thing, someone befouling your environment in a way that you can't breathe clean air or drink clean water, someone selling you, products that are more likely to kill you, someone selling you products that are likely to give you cancer, right? That is where freedom actually is restricted. And I think in a lot of other countries that I travel to and have reported on in my career, people are just a little bit more sensitive to both those kinds of oppressions. Yeah, you can be oppressed by the government. Yeah, the government can take things it shouldn't. But also, billionaires can, companies can, powerful employers can. And I think we in America do not have a healthy vigilance toward private actors. And I give that whole long context to say, when an Elon Musk comes around, I don't think we have our defenses up. We don't know. We're so trained to just admire that kind of wealth and think it's going to happen to us one day. And I just want to say to every listener of this podcast, I just want to guarantee you right now, that's not going to happen to you. You are not, in fact, going to become a centibillionaire. So stop carrying water for one in the hope that you might become one, and actually start being a little more jealous of your own liberties.
Interesting. So I want to just jump into something, because we're not just fascinated by the wealth. It's also the salacious stories that come out. And, you have, for example, the Matt Gaetz, the ethics report by the House. And there's all these calls. I can't believe a guy who stepped away from his seat as a member of Congress, a guy who was nominated by Trump to be attorney general, that stepped away from that because obviously he learned that he was not going to be getting approved. He wasn't going to be confirmed based upon a lot of issues that are alleged against him. But they're still talking about it. It still occupies this 24/7 news cycle, the calls for the release of that ethics report on Matt Gaetz. My question to you, because I don't think they should do it. Personally, I don't give a shit what he did. I really don't care. I don't care what the report says. He's no longer in Congress. He's not going to be the AG. He's going to be a talk show host on OAN News Channel. I don't give a shit what he does. It means nothing to me. Turn it over to the police, to the attorney general, let them deal with it. But how important do you see transparency, for example, in this specific Matt Gaetz case? And what's your take on why the GOP seems so hesitant and resistant to permit its release?
I see it a little differently, which is that I think we live in a time in which a great, great majority of people feel completely ignored and neglected and uncared for by the power establishment, left and right, corporate and governmental, and everything in between, in which the great, great majority of people feel like the world is run through these kind of opaque machinations that they can't quite understand and see. And it's very hard to bring transparency to all of that. And so when there are individual cases that allow you to get kind of a biopsy of the system, of how these things work, of what's really going on, I actually think they're very valuable, right? Not because, the individual case is important in itself, but because glimpses of how the system works that are available to regular people are just really few and far between, right? We don't really know what happens between members of Congress and their donors. I would love to know more. I'd love if they all wore body cams, but that's not available to us, right? We don't really know what happens between Donald Trump and the handful of people around him right now, right? There's all kinds of things that would be great to have some insight on. We don't really know, what has been promised between, say, Elon Musk and Donald Trump, or between RFK Jr. and Donald Trump. So the significance of a case, the Epstein thing some time ago, or the Gaetz case now, it's just that you get, because of this legal proceeding, you get a glimpse into the reality of the system that I actually think ends up being valuable. Sure, it's salacious, but it's valuable, I think. I think it's valuable to know, the kind of behavior that is totally tolerable to a Trump administration. It is valuable, hopefully valuable. A huge number of women voted for Donald Trump this time around. His long history of misogyny did not hurt him very much with them. I think it's valuable to have information about what people around Donald Trump, how they treat women.
But they do. But in all fairness, they do. Pete Hegseth is up on the chopping board. Matt Gaetz has been on the chopping board. Even Linda McMahon, with her eyes closed. Jim Jordan, his story has been out there. I mean, there's no shortage of
that is true.
Of these sort of scandals. I personally believe that this ethics report does nothing for you. It does nothing for me. It doesn't educate the public on anything. We already know, based upon Joel Greenberg, his partner in in the allegations, where Joel Greenberg is actually doing time right now. We already know enough of the story. If he was still a member of Congress, sure, I could see a probative value. But since he's completely out of the game, I just don't see, other than creating another reality show out of it, I just don't see where it benefits. Again, another issue on this, nobody's going to read the ethics report. You will, I will, a small number of people will. And then I'm going to go do it on my Michael Cohen YouTube show. I'll put it here by asking people like yourself, Anand, questions about it and so on. And you'll only get a small glimpse into, let's say it's 100 pages, maybe 4 pages will get covered. And which are those 4 pages? The most salacious part about it. right? I mean, that's all that people care. So many people, they just get their news from TikTok, from X, from Threads, from Blue Sky, from podcasts like this, from from your works, from your newsletters and so on, your journalist, papers and so on. It's not enough. It's just not enough, which kind of brings me to this question now, especially that you have Elon controlling X. And I think that, formerly Twitter, X is just a fucking cesspool of hatred and bots and bullshit and stifling, people who don't fall into their algorithm. His ability to influence public discourse, I believe that these social media platforms have become way too powerful. And I think it actually shaped the political outcome of this election. Do you think that there needs to be some sort of a governmental check on this power?
I think there does, I think, I don't know how much time you've spent with some of these Silicon Valley guys and some of the social media guys in particular. I've spent a little bit of time with them over the years from my reporting. And I think there's something, if you haven't actually been in a room with them, you may not understand the following point. These are almost all men, first of all, and they're all men of a certain kind of personal style, which is to say, these are men who are almost uniquely untalented at social stuff, meaning stuff with other people. These are men who, almost to a person, if you were in a party with them, you'd say this is the person in the room of 100 who is least intelligent about other people in the room, who is least able to connect with other people in the room, who's least capable of being friends, making friendships in this room, who's, just, they're very smart. Often they've built businesses. They're very good at writing code. I don't even think it's necessarily, it's in some cases, it may be a brain thing. I think in many cases, it's just like a what you care about thing. But without passing judgment on it, these are people for whom the social sphere of life is sort of their greatest weakness. And now they have become in charge of social media. They have become the builders of the infrastructure of our discourse. So our discourse is being owned and operated. Think of a Mark Zuckerberg. Could you imagine being left alone at a party for like 5 minutes with Mark Zuckerberg? Like, what conversation would you have, right? This guy started that app, Facebook, because he couldn't talk to girls, face to face. So these people are now in charge of our discourse. The people least able to connect are in charge of our connections. The people who no one in their right mind would ever really want to be friends with are now in charge of friending people, right? These people who kind of no one ever liked are now in charge of like what gets likes, right? And so I think this explains a tremendous amount. I mean, just look at someone like Elon Musk, right? You look at him, listen to him, just like a sort of an odious figure, right? Could you imagine how the world would treat Elon Musk if he made 35 grand? Right? Would just be a despised figure, incapable of compassion, driving his own children away. You have one job on this planet. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. Is to keep your family together. Is to tend to your children. To have your children, have a child of yours say, I can't in good conscience be who I am and stay in relationship with my father. I don't care what success you have, you're a failure.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And those are the people governing the platforms of human connection.
I guess money's the great equalizer, isn't it?
It is. And so then that falls on us. We have to decide in two different ways. One, through the choice of what we use. Do we want to live our lives on these apps? Do we want to live our lives on these algorithms? Do we want to move over to something like Blue Sky instead of X, for example? But then the question you raise on regulation: do we want to actually regulate these things? When I bought car seats for my kids, I mean, those are heavily regulated for a good reason. You can't just make whatever car seat you want to make.
Hmm.
You can't just say
Right.
let's make it with orange peels instead of this heavy styrofoam. Let's just see how that goes. You can't do
Why
that.
styrofoam? Just take two pieces of wood, nail them together, or just
There
glue
you
them
go.
together, and
There you
and
go.
put the seatbelt around it. I agree
Exactly.
with you.
You
That's
can't
right.
do that.
See
Why?
that
Why is the
child
people? Why are
seats
the
are
people?
more regulated than our social media platforms.
And
It's
remember, this
amazing.
is
Like
not
now
just
they're
people
trying to
sharing lunches, right?
right.
This is people like governing electoral discourse, right? Get out the vote information. There were studies that showed that Facebook had the ability, whether it chose to use it or not, to influence the vote by the extent to which it showed you people in your social network voting, or the extent to which it suppressed that information, right?
Mhm.
Why are we regulating, frankly, this can of Diet Coke more? Every piece of chicken breast is way more highly regulated and inspected by the government than electoral tipping, the possibility of tipping elections.
It's amazing, right? Yeah. So let me ask you this, because one thing we already know from 2016 election, from 2017 through 2020, is Donald's approach to leadership. It's been described by, I don't even know, countless people as governing by chaos. And the people who actually claim governing by chaos are those that were working for him, right? So if when he retakes the White House on January 20th, how do you see this chaos strategy affecting critical geopolitical hotspots like Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, Iran, Syria? What do you end up seeing?
I mean, I think you're dealing with someone who, as you know better than most people,
Pretty much anybody, yeah.
is not really. I mean, I even hesitate to say is not intellectually capable. I mean, that almost makes him sound smarter than he is. I mean, there's just not. It's not a lot there, right? And so, and then there are, on the other hand, these tremendous, tremendous personal wounds, right? I don't know if you'd attribute it to his father's relationship with him or what. But when you have someone who has so little intellectual horsepower and then so much personal need and insecurity and lack, it's just a very, very dangerous thing in general. And then when you subject such a person to a question like, what do you do about Putin, or what do you do about Kim Jong Un? Unfortunately, you do not get someone reading 100-page stacks of paper after the dinner at night, going to the White House study and reading the 100 pages as Obama did and other people of responsibility did. You have someone who is processing those decisions through an incredibly feeble intellect, and B, these really deep kind of insecure attachment, that kind of stuff. Um, and so that's why you get, him getting into my nuclear button is bigger than Kim Jong Un's. I mean, we can laugh at that, right? But I would encourage people to understand that in a slightly different way, which is really like America and North Korea getting into a nuclear, verbal argument that is incredibly dangerous. That is just someone who A, does not have a lot of intellectual firepower, and B, is mainly processing the world through slights and hurts and like the perpetual feeling that he is not loved, right? And we need someone in that job who is like reading data and evidence and trying to just figure out whatever the philosophy, right? Um, and this is more just like a 8 or 9 year old who doesn't really, not able to process his own feelings, and geopolitics just becomes like another set of
But
feelings to process.
sure. But in all fairness, during his administration, we certainly didn't have Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, Hamas, Iran, Syria. We had issues, but nothing like this. And that's what Republicans kept hammering home. We didn't have all this stuff under Trump. We didn't have these issues, whether he's an intellectual genius or whether he's just batshit stupid. It doesn't matter, right? All that matters is that we weren't sending billions upon billions and billions of dollars overseas in armaments because these conflicts didn't even exist. That's the argument that also brought over a whole bunch of Democrats to
Yeah,
either stay away
I think
from
that's
the
true.
election, yeah, or just
But
to vote for Trump.
but I do not attribute that, relative tranquility that you might call it in the international scene, or the more chaos now. I don't attribute that to Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I mean, I don't think Hamas timed its October 7th attacks, because
Right.
Joe Biden was president. I mean, I think these things have, when you travel the world, you realize like other places have their own history, their own calendars, their own timetables. Things are happening in those places because of events in those places. I don't think those wars broke out when they did any more than I think, COVID broke out because Donald Trump was president. Like the world is its own thing, right? And all you don't get to decide as an American when Hamas launches an attack. You don't get to
Right.
decide when a virus breaks out of Wuhan. That's unfortunately not within our power. What you get to choose is what kind of person is in the Oval Office when things like that happen, right? And people who are trying to remember Trump as sort of, a time of tranquility. I mean, you can't subtract the year 2020, where a significant number of people would have died because of policies that were worse than they could have been, right? Because of disinformation that was allowed to flow rampantly on the right. And so, look, other people may want entertainment. But when it comes to geopolitics, I want someone who's
Right.
able to do their homework.
Yeah, I'm not looking for the reality show Kardashian country, so to speak. I look, I'm all for peace and for tranquility, but I'm not looking for the chaos that we're anticipating.
Yeah.
And I'm trying not to anticipate anything simply because we just don't know. But here are things that we do know. We know that Trump has a disdain for NATO and traditional alliances. I mean, during his administration, and again, I'm not speaking in the hypothetical. I refuse to do that. I didn't do it when I was on CNN. I won't do it on MSNBC, and I won't do it with you either, right? I only talk facts. Donald has a disdain for NATO and our traditional alliances. He disrespected our allies and he cozied up to our adversaries. These are facts. My question to you is, what do you think he ends up doing with NATO altogether?
I mean, I don't know if he can spell NATO, first of all. I think it is this isolate. I mean, first of all, like he applies these frameworks that he has from whatever sort of businesses he was trying to run, and he applies them to the world politics in a way that's just not applicable. So he's just like, he talks about NATO as like, or European countries as sort of, the way you talk about business units within a corporation that are not like carrying their own weight financially and need to be spun off from the company because they're like cost centers instead of profit centers. Unfortunately, that's not a helpful framework when it comes to NATO. You don't like we're not in an alliance with, say, Belgium, because it's profitable to us. There's historical reasons, as you said. There's Holocaust survivors in your family. There's many historical reasons related to that and other things why we have entered into alliances like NATO that keep peace, keep prosperity, that provide a pretty broad blanket across dozens of countries for people to start their businesses and plan their families and build homes and build lives, not worried about the kind of outbreak of war that had essentially been the nonstop reality of Europe for centuries. Um, and Donald Trump, again, just if you don't have an understanding of history that goes back longer than like the last Big Mac you ate, then you may not know what NATO's for, and then it's easy to be like, yeah, why? Like, what is that getting us, right? What kind of revenue is NATO bringing in? This is not as someone who understands the purpose of that, and I would say also, the founders of this country talked about in the Declaration. We pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Donald Trump is not someone who understands. He understands deals, but I'm not sure he understands solidarity, right? Which is you and I holding together, not because we're like exchanging something or both benefiting in a kind of financial way from something, but actually potentially both sacrificing, right? When he talked about, soldiers, John Kelly, people who died in combat, being suckers and losers, whatever that was, right? There's just this inability to understand the notion of sacrifice, right? NATO is in some ways, it's a sacrifice. We're not profiting from NATO. I mean, I would argue we actually do when the world turns out to be peaceful and countries not invading each other all the time. It kind of actually is quite good for everybody. But I think he's incapable of understanding anything that is not a deal, anything that is not like paying you. And that notion of kind of entwining your fortunes and sacred honor with somebody else or another country, it's just alien to his view of the world.
Yeah. Well, look, the world in and of itself right now seems to be in some major flux. I mean, here in the country, we're seeing, the right wing populism gaining influence. I mean, clearly, it's the right wing populism that ended up giving Trump this victory. It's also happening in other parts of the world as well, where you're seeing the more moderates getting tossed out, and you're seeing these right wingers becoming now the next generation. We're going to have a whole world full of individuals, all basically one way, and it's far right way. What do you think's driving this? What do you think's driving this movement? And more importantly, how do you stop it?
It's a great question. And I think this is really important because in some ways, America has one of the weirder incarnations of this phenomenon. And so if we just think about the American one, it really becomes a conversation, as this has been, about Trump and the peculiar nature of this man and the kind of force field he's created. And you're right that this is a global phenomenon that is much bigger than Trump. And in a way, it's helpful to look at these dynamics in other countries because then you see the bigger forces at play instead of attributing it to one guy. And this is, you could argue, this kind of these political currents have been seen in Brazil, in India, in the Philippines, in some European countries. And I think what you're seeing at a very broad level, I mean, it's hard to generalize across these places. I think there is a very widespread sense, number one, that democracy hasn't proven that it can make people's lives better in many places for quite some time. And that there's almost a self-satisfied smugness of those of us who believe in democracy. Just like, democracy is a self-evident truth. It's good. It makes your life better. Shut the fuck up. And actually, people don't respond to that. I think in a lot of places in the world, including here, but not only here, people are like, what did your democracy do for me in the financial crisis? What did your democracy do for me in COVID? What, right? And
Well, how about they gave you the COVID relief plan? How about they sent you money every
look,
single month?
I'm on your side on this.
Right.
But a lot of people, that is not the perception that a lot of people have. And over a generation in this country, it has become punishingly difficult to be a regular person economically, right? So we talk about democracy, and like 70% of people are like, I can't afford a medical bill. I can't deal with like an unexpected $400 emergency cost of my car or my health or something else. Like, what is this democracy doing for me? So that's one. I think it's happening many places. I think another is that there has been a tremendous amount of gender progress in this country, racial progress, other countries kind of progress towards more multiracial, multi-ethnic societies. And I think we've done those of us who like that kind of change have done a very bad job of helping people cope, right? We've almost treated social change as something that if it's the right kind of change, then you might as well get with the program. You got to get with the program. And actually, people need help. Men, I think, as we now know in this election, I've been beating this drum for a long time. Men need help in the transition to a gender equal world. Maybe you could argue they shouldn't need help. They've been helped enough. But here's the reality. It is not self-evident to lots and lots of men how you behave, how you operate in a new world in which you can't say the things you used to say. You can't count on the automatic privileges you used to count on. You and I are sort of middle-aged. Like, we've probably had to adjust in certain ways. If, like, our dad's generation, the difference between the training they got about how to be guys versus the reality they have to live in, but you could say that about race. You could say that about different things. People need help coping with progress. And I think we failed to do that. And a lot of people then feel adrift, don't feel they know quite how to fit in, don't feel the future is for them, and they get attracted to these populist authoritarian movements. And the final thing I'll say that I think is an unforced error on the part of pro-democracy movements is that somehow these populist authoritarian movements have cornered the market on being the side of community, of connection, of excitement, of actually making people feel seen and heard and recognized, of providing some kind of often transcendent, ecstatic human experiences. I think it is and the pro-democracy side, I think, has been left sometimes flat-footed, kind of technocratic, talking in a language of policy details and numbers and statistics, not moving people, not connecting to the soul. And it's a real shame that pro-democracy movements that actually have a lot to offer humanity and that are motivated by a kind of ideal of love among people don't necessarily show up that way as movements. They often seem kind of judgmental or tedious. And these, on the other hand, these authoritarian movements that are totally, dehumanizing in their substance, they somehow have built movements that feel like a good time, right? And even young people are being drawn into them today, not because they, love their stance on the budget negotiations, but because they feel like, I'm going to ride with you for the afternoon. And so I think we have to close that gap and build a pro-democracy movement that is a community that people want to be part of. That we have to throw a better party.
Yeah, I mean, that's you got it. You literally nailed it. That populist view, the MAGA movement, it's like a fraternity sorority smashed into one gigantic. You wear that hat, come on in. You're welcome. It's like, being a fraternity brother from DC and you happen to see a house, in Florida, knock on the door, you give them the handshake. Next thing you know, here, it's not a handshake, it's a red hat. It's just anything that says MAGA on it. It's amazing. So, look, the hour goes by very quickly. Like I said, I really have one last question for you, and it's kind of a little bit of a tough one here. There's so many forces out there that we talked about over the course of this hour that's working against democracy, working against our democratic republic. Billionaires influencing government, authoritarian populists taking power, attacks on our institutions, whether it's free press or anything else thereafter. Where do you see hope? What's the path forward for democracy and justice? You see, this country, as my dad always says, we're a country of laws without justice. What do we do? How do we move forward?
So I love that question. My grandfather just turned 100 years old.
Wow, God bless.
He lives in India. He's lived in India his whole life. I was able to go fly to India in November to go be with him, and little party that we had for 60 or 70 people for his 100th birthday. And I spent time in India. And I lived in India for 6 years after college. I was a foreign correspondent for the New York Times in India. So I know India well, in addition to my parents emigrated from there. So I was born in this country, but I have spent a lot of time in India and understand India better than I understand most other places. And I love so many things about India. But it really struck me on this recent trip there that no matter how much money you have in India, I mean, certainly if you're poor in India, it's game over from the day of your birth. If you're a woman in India, there's a pretty good chance it's lights out from the time of your birth in terms of really being able to realize the potential you may have. But even when you go up the ladder in a place like India, where my family comes from, ancient culture with so much to offer, for all but a very small number of Indians, there is just not much opportunity to reinvent yourself, to move away through evolution and education from your family's views of things, to change your fortune, to acquire new beliefs that were not necessarily the customs and folk ways of your people. It is in many ways, and I say this as someone who admires this society, but every time I go and think of my family that left and the people who stayed, it's a place that in many ways most people are stuck in the kind of box of their birth. And a very small number of people get to really realize themselves and grow out of that box.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I go there, as much as I enjoy it, I feel so immensely grateful. And I am reminded of what the United States does differently. What the United States, I would say, maybe it's a unique idea in the world that is even different from any place in Europe, where there is an idea at the heart of this society that people should invent themselves, should become the fullest versions of themselves, should not be tied down by the customs of their village or by the tribe they're from or by the religion they're from, should be able to realize themselves and grow in new directions. Have we ever lived up to that perfectly? No. Has that always been available to everybody? No. But I would argue that idea, that beautiful idea of being able to escape your box and make and form yourself, realize your deepest potential, is at the heart of this country's experiment. It is something that has been practiced here on a scale that it probably hasn't been in most places. Tell anybody who's ever tried to start a business in a Western European country, a lot of things I admire about those countries. Having an idea and trying to implement it, not so easy in France or Germany. There is and I say that all to say, there is something at the heart of this American experiment that is awesome. There is something about trying to build what we are trying to build, which is a country made of the world, a country where people come from all the other countries in the world, right? A country that is forged of people from everywhere. This country made of the world, where people have the chance to make of themselves what they will, is a profound idea in the history of the world. It is a profound practice that I think we are trying to extend to more and more people and make true for more and more people. It is an experiment worth fighting for. And I think we are falling on our face in this era because we are jumping high. Donald Trump is not a movement of the future. It's not an exciting movement of imagination. It is a classic movement of backlash. This is the kind of backlash you get when you make progress, when you open up the concept of who belongs, when you open up the concept of who is a person, who is we. And I think we are going to have a rough ride in the coming few years. I wouldn't minimize it. But I don't think Donald Trump is actually steering the ship of our future. I think he's a barnacle on the hull of our progress. And I think in many ways he's a revolt against the future. And I think the future is going to prevail.
No. Guess we'll wait to see, right? We'll see what happens on January 20th when he comes in with hundreds of executive orders, to see what happens to an Indian American, a Polish American, right? And we'll see what ends up happening to the future of this country. I don't know. I'm with you. For whatever the reason, this election demonstrated that Americans, like so many other countries, the citizens of those countries, want to be led. Not, they want to be ruled for whatever reason. But Anand, thank you so much, my friend. I'll see you around. We'll have coffee, my favorite little coffee joint, any day that you're free.
That sounds great.
I'm definitely asking you to come back because, as you know, there's going to be a lot of chaos. There's going to be a lot to talk about. And you certainly have a way of helping to make us smarter and to break it down. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I always enjoy chatting with you.
I'll see you soon, brother.
All right. See you soon.